Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I've got some week 2 running back rankings for this individual week's games here in 2021 fantasy football. I've got numbers 1 through 24 here in today's episode, but if you'd like to gain additional access to 25 through 48 in my weekly positional rankings, in addition to quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends, you can go check that out, and defenses as well, if that's something you're interested in taking a look at. You can find access to that by going down in the link of the description in today's video and clicking on the SFS Gold section, which will take you to my website, stillfantasy.com, and for just over $1 a week, you can get access to all of those weekly positional rankings and individualized and personalized content. If you'd like myself or Eric to set your lineups for you, you'll get exclusive rights and membership privileges on the SFS community Discord server. So go check that out. Without further ado, let's hit that intro and get straight in to our first player. All right, at the number 1 spot, although I'm not too crazy about the matchup this week, it's really hard to debate this one. I mean, Christian McCaffrey had 30 total touches last week and dang near 100 yards from scrimmage in each of the rushing and receiving statistical categories. He caught 9 of his 9 targets. This dude is just amazing. He had the Jets last week, didn't find the end zone, but the numbers were still great. The production was phenomenal. He's got the Saints this week. It's a tougher matchup, but it's a division game, and McCaffrey has found a way to produce in these games in the past, despite the Saints being one of the top-end rushing, stopping defensive lines and defensive units in the league. So if there's anyone that's matchup-proof, can beat this tough competition, it is Christian McCaffrey, and that awesome receiving value as well is obviously something fantastic to factor into this situation. Before I get into my number 2 running back for Week 2 NFL action, I want to talk to you all about my favorite way to increase my profitability in odds when I bet on sports this season. OddsJam is a website that compares sports betting odds from over 30 top sportsbooks and helps you find the best value regardless of which side of the line you're betting on. Let's take tonight's Thursday Night Football matchup, for example, by heading over to the odds drop-down menu and selecting the football option. I can take a look at all of these different game modes for the Thursday Night Football matchup between the Washington football team and the New York Giants. And if we scroll down here, we can see the different lines we're given from all of the various sports books out there that OddsJam has for us to take a look at. So you can see the best odds right now. If you were going to place a bet on the Washington football team, could be found on Barstool at Washington minus 167. But if you're looking to bet on the New York Football Giants this week, OddsJam's got you covered with plus 158 odds, giving you the best value in return for that side of the line. I'm taking Washington, however, this week. I don't think there's any chance that Giants O-line can hold up against that front 7. Additionally, OddsJam also hosts a great feature in arbitrage bets, which is essentially risk-free betting on the site with guaranteed returns on your investment. Arbitrage bets, you can see a couple of examples on the screen. For instance, Chicago versus Cincinnati this week. You see the odds minus 333 and plus 335. These different lines are so similar that if you place an even bet on each side of these equations based on the sports books that OddsJam has provided to you, one of the bets will lose, the other of the bets will win, and that winning bet will net you a return of 11%. So essentially what's happened here is OddsJam has lined up the 2 best values out there for you and made sure that if you place that bet on each side of the matchup, you are going to get on a return on the money you put into that game. Sign up for your free OddsJam account today by heading over to the top link in the description of today's video and go check out their Twitter, which I've also tagged down in that description as well. Hopping right back into today's list, Alvin Kamara is my number 2 running back for Week 2 fantasy football. It's kind of a tough read to say exactly how good or how bad the Panthers' run stop is this season in relationship to how they finished last year. They did struggle at times last season. It was a younger defense, but they've really taken steps forward to my eye test. Now, they were playing the Jets last week. This was a team that was struggling. They could not get the run game started to save their lives. And they honestly were kind of in a rut early on because Zach Wilson started like 2 for 7 passing. It's just a tough game to analyze and interpret. But at the end of the day, what I love about Alvin Kamara here and why he makes my list as my number 2 running back is he's essentially score-proof and game-proof here. There's no situation that's going to result in Alvin Kamara seeing a decrease in snaps other than the Saints absolutely blowing their competition out of the water. He's going to be out there on the field running the game out if it's still within a few scores and they're just trying to wind the clock down in the fourth quarter. And if this team's getting stomped, which is not something I would expect this week, he's going to be out there because he's one of the most elite passing threats out of the backfield in the league. He probably is the most elite passing threat out of the backfield, maybe outside of Christian McCaffrey. So there's an element of safety here and versatility that's just fantastic. He also gets himself in the end zone, which is great as well. Alvin Kamara at this number 2 spot this week. Dalvin Cook. This is one I had higher than Kamara, but then I took a second, rethought my evaluation, and I really think that this Cardinals pass rush and defensive line, the acquisition of J.J. Watt's a bigger deal than was given credit for. Cook wasn't all that efficient against the Bengals last week. He had 20-some carries, and he only had about 60 yards rushing. So we're looking at a runner who didn't necessarily get off to as quite of a hot start as I expected him to. He's still one of the premier backs in this league. He still sees that premier rushing volume that a lot of other fantasy running backs dream of, and that's something that gives him an uber-safe floor. But if Minnesota struggles to hang with the high-volume passing and the high-powered offense that is Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, Chase Edmonds, the list goes on and on, Christian Kirk, Rondale Moore, all those guys out there, and we see a similar situation to the Titans last week where they just couldn't keep up, that's the one risk with Dalvin Cook this week. But outside of that, he should be just fine and get those weekly numbers. Derrick Henry, who was the victim of that Tennessee Titans-Arizona Cardinals matchup last week, found himself on the sideline a lot. They weren't able to keep up in that game and keep him in a relevant situation to be controlling the game clock, which is the style of football they like to play. Seattle has that same risk this week, if I'm being completely honest. These early week matchups aren't playing out so nicely for a lot of our top-end fantasy football running backs, but this will open up opportunities in those trade episodes you see from me here on the channel. So click that subscribe button, turn the bell on. If you haven't checked out any of those episodes in the past, you should go do so. They're great. We put them out every week. But nonetheless, Derrick Henry here is a player that if the Titans are in this game will see 20-plus touches. It's just the factored-in situation to who he is as a player. As long as the Titans are in the game, Derrick Henry will have the football in his hands. If the Titans get on the goal line, it's Derrick Henry time. Every once in a while, they'll mix things up and run a little play-action pass or boot Tannehill into the end zone. But Derrick Henry is the number 1 threat inside the 20-yard line. Once they get down there, they're trying to hammer the football out, play tough, nitty-gritty football. Derrick Henry should be a very safe option this week if, again, the Titans are able to stay within a reasonably close margin in this football game. Nick Chubb at the number 5 spot playing the Texans this week. Chubb was fantastic, found the end zone twice. He did fumble, but the rushing yards were good. The usage was good. Much of the same from Nick Chubb as we look back to 2020, even 2019. This dude's still a star, still one of the best pure rushers in the league. He got the Texans this week. Nothing I'm too afraid of. I don't think that the Texans are as easy of an opponent as we expected them to be. I think they're a lot more well-coached than I give them credit for. And last week, the Jags looked like more of the mess despite having a first and second round pick, actually 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick, as opposed to the Texans not picking until the 3rd round. They still came out here and found a way to shell that shell that Jacksonville team. So maybe there's a little bit more respect that needs to be paid to the Houston Texans, but that's nothing that should slow Nick Chubb down. He's got probably the best offensive line in the league from top to bottom. All 5 of those starters are great. Him and Kareem Hunt should have a productive week here in week 2. Ezekiel Elliott will bounce back, get back on track this week. Against the Los Angeles Chargers, Antonio Gibson had over 100 yards from scrimmage in week 1. That's very encouraging for me to see. I think that the Chargers might be able to throw the ball all over the yard on the Dallas Cowboys defense. But you turn around, I think that Dak Prescott, Mike McCarthy, that offense is going to try and slow things down a little bit if they're able to. Hopefully Zeke's volume gets back into that 20-touch territory. If he finds the end zone, we could be looking at a pretty strong performance again. Zeke will creep himself back into legitimate RB1 territory after this week's performance. Najee Harris, this is one where a lot of people right now at number 7 might be raising some eyebrows, but I still think this kid's got all the things, all the tools he needs to get the job done. He's got a 3-down skill set. He's an explosive athlete. He can make plays in the open field. He's a receiving capable player, and the fact that he can get out there, catch a swing pass in stride, make a smooth transition, and get off to the races. He's a bigger player. He can play physical. This is a guy I think that can be used near the end zone and put up some production in that area of the field. Against Las Vegas, they got gashed by the Ravens in the run game week 1, and they don't have a legitimate running back right now. Tyson Williams, we saw Latavius Murray sprinkled in there. Lamar Jackson was eating them up with his own legs. The only thing that can stop Najee Harris is his own offensive line, If he gets out there, if those guys take a step forward from last week, the Buffalo Bills are no joke. They're a well-coached team. They're not exactly a Tampa Bay-esque defensive front, but they are still very good at stopping the run. Najee should get out here, hopefully have that breakout style game, and I think his upside is very, very high, especially considering the fact that he could find himself into the end zone a couple times. Aaron Jones, another player I'm expecting to have a breakout week, a bounce-back week here in week 2. The Lions got eaten up by Elijah Mitchell, the 49ers' third-string running back, a rookie, 19 rushes, 104 yards, and a touchdown. If Elijah Mitchell can do that in his first NFL action as a player who no one anticipated having a high workload last week, Aaron Jones, one of the more talented backs in the league, he's probably a top 5 or 6 running back. He can come out here, make things happen. He's very dynamic. I expect Green Bay to take major steps forward this week and to not get blown out of the water. It may still be a tight game because Detroit seems to often find a way to stay in it late against the Packers, but Aaron Jones should have his way. He should get back on track here. All these players should, and you'll see that reflected in my wide receiver rankings episode as well. That's coming out this morning. Aaron Jones at the number 8 spot here in week 2. Jonathan Taylor, someone I would like to have higher, and I do have some positivity to take away, some optimism from David Montgomery on Sunday Night Football with the success he had with what I would equate to be a much lesser offensive line than the Indianapolis Colts and the things he was able to do against this Rams defensive front. You've got Quentin Nelson, you've got some other guys up front that can make things happen and move defenders out of the way. Aaron Donald's going to be a handful. But Jonathan Taylor was still able to produce in week 1 despite not having a touchdown. He did have over 100 yards from scrimmage. He was heavily utilized and was actually their leading receiver for that afternoon game against the Seahawks. Hopefully the Colts can stay in the game a little bit better than they did against Seattle week 1. If that's the case, they control the tempo in this game. I don't think that the Colts will ultimately win this one, but for part of the game, they may be able to stay very, very close. I think JT can come out here, have another 100-yard game, and if, again, these players all have the opportunity to find the end zone at the top of the list because they have that bigger back size, that more traditional workhorse skill set. They can find the end zone. That's why I love their upsides, and they are able to beat these top 10 running back caliber players. Joe Mixon versus Chicago here. Similar situation. Sunday Night Football, Darrell Henderson showed us that he's able to make plays happen when his offensive linemen move Bears out of the way. And I thought this run stop would be more stable, more sturdy with Akeem Hicks and Khalil Mack up front. That wasn't the case. Now, is the Bengals offensive line anywhere near as good as the Los Angeles Rams offensive line? No, absolutely not. But Joe Mixon got the job done at a very good clip against the Vikings week 1. He is another one of these players that sees really, really good volume. His efficiency isn't always awesome, and if he isn't able to find some space and make an explosive play, his production might suffer a little bit. But at the end of the day, he has the potential to be out there on all 3 downs of the game, be utilized in the red zone as that goal line type player, and just do everything for us that we ask of him here. I think the Bears, it looks like kind of a scary matchup on paper, but it's something I think that he can overcome here in week 2. Chris Carson. Now, I thought about moving him higher up on this list. I love the matchup. What I'm thinking here is similar to the Cardinals game last week with the Titans. Seattle might come out here, and there is the potential that they have very similar quarterbacks, deep downfield attacking, passing offenses. They could get out to an early lead and get the jump on the Titans just like Arizona did. If they did, and that's the case, power running with Chris Carson, blow this game out here. He's a player that always has some risk factored into his game because I feel like he always gets dinged up, whether it's an untimely fumble, whatever the case might be. Now, Rashad Penny is out of this game actually because he himself got injured, but Chris Carson always just seems like he's got a little bit of something going on in the background. Nonetheless, I love the matchup here. Chris Carson is a workhorse running back when he is the option out on the field for the Seattle Seahawks, and he is a touchdown magnet as well. So the ceiling is sky high for Carson this week. He could absolutely finish higher than this spot on the list. He's probably a must-start player in my book. He didn't make the 5 must-start running backs list for this week just because I thought it was a little bit too obvious. But if you're watching this now, there you go. If you've got Chris Carson, put him in those lineups this week. He should produce like an RB1. And David Montgomery rounds out the 12-man league RB1s here at this number 12 position against the Bengals. The reason I put him a little bit lower is because of Dalvin Cook's struggles last week to find efficient running lanes. Again, I think that that's something that's a little bit tougher to read into here because Montgomery actually produced very well against a very elite defensive line in Los Angeles last week. So not quite sure what to make of this one yet. At the end of the day, I think David Montgomery is going to go out here and see workhorse utilization and workhorse volume once again this week. That's going to result in a productive outing for him. He can be used as a rusher and a receiver. And I don't think the Bengals are one of the premier run stops in the league. So although Dalvin Cook did have his struggles last week, I think Montgomery can move past that and show some improvements and some cracks in that Bengals front. DeAndre Swift against the Green Bay Packers. This is a situation you should be jumping all over of right now. If you are in a situation where you're kind of trying to break down that Lions backfield. These guys scored a lot of their points right at the end of the game when the Lions stormed back and made their comeback run. Both Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift found the end zone. They had 20-plus point fantasy outings and were very, very productive at the end of the game. So that when they were getting blown out, there wasn't much value to be had here, but they were able to make big plays late, and that ultimately exploded their value right now. So I'm actually in the sell high market for those players at the moment. But DeAndre Swift, if you're going to hang on to him here, a great option this week. Could easily finish as an RB1. The Packers have one of the worst run stops in the NFL. They don't play enough dedicated run-stopping defensive players to make an honest effort here. And DeAndre Swift gives us so much after the catch as a pass catcher that he adds an element of explosiveness and versatility, that dynamic running back skill set that you love to see. So I would love him more if Jamal Williams wasn't heavily utilized. You've got sort of a revenge game dynamic going on here with the Green Bay Packers and Jamal Williams facing off on the field, but Jamal was more of a situational back anyway, so it's not like he was a key franchise player that's coming out here and trying to stick it to the Packers. But DeAndre Swift, nonetheless, in the number 13 spot, a high-end RB2 for this week. Austin Ekeler is a player I do have ranked lower for right now against the Dallas Cowboys. Here's the reason why. Rojo and Leonard Fournette both struggled a lot in week one, and those were power runners. Those are actually players I expected to have very productive games, and they had their own blunders, their own mistakes that contributed to the lack of running downs that were used. But when they were actually given the ball, the point of contact that was being made with them was very, very instant. And the thing I attribute that to, what I chalk that up to, is how dang fast that linebacking core is. Those dudes fly all over the field, plug up holes and gaps in the offensive line very quickly. And that's a big red flag. Austin Ekeler is a sneaky, shifty player. He can be used very well as a pass-catching force. But I do worry that when you've got 200-plus pound linebackers flying downhill, that he's not going to be able to put his shoulder down and run them over. That's the type of player that I think will succeed against this Cowboys defensive unit this season. And Austin Ekeler absolutely could get out in space and make a big play this week. But I think the floor is a little bit more shaky than it is on a normal week-to-week basis. The ceiling is always there. That pass-catching volume makes him a great option in PPR formats. But again, that actual rushing work, I think, will be a struggle, and I'm really crossing my fingers that he finds the end zone. Otherwise, I think we're in for a disappointing week here from Austin. Damien Harris is kind of the opposite. His ceiling is never elite, but his floor seems to always be very, very quality. Versus the New York Jets this week, I think New England's just going to control the pace of this game, pound the rock. That offensive line is a dominating force, and Damien Harris will find his work. He'll find his room to run, and he'll rack up the yardage. I think that at the end of the week, he'll be somewhere between a high-end RB2 to a middle-of-the-pack RB2, and his numbers will be very steady and consistent as always, but maybe not in that upper echelon of running backs. Antonio Gibson is a player who I absolutely love this year. His dynamic ability is fantastic. I love the pass-catching threat. I love what he does as a pure rusher, but the Giants, that matchup just is not it this week. They bottled up Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams the entire game last week until Melvin broke a 70-yard touchdown in the fourth quarter. If that doesn't happen, you're looking at two very, very underwhelming below-average performances. So That's concerning to me. This Giants defensive unit is underrated in my book. I think this is going to be kind of an ugly Thursday night football matchup. A lot of turnovers, not too much scoring. It is a division game, so that kind of adds an X factor element that can make it a little bit more wild and unpredictable. But at the end of the day, I think the run game is going to struggle to get going here for Washington. And Gibson didn't have a bad game in week 1, but it didn't necessarily seem like something all that great. Just looking back in retrospect, it was a steady performance, but obviously he didn't quite hit those ceiling numbers. Miles Sanders at number 17 here against San Francisco. Now, something I want to point out if you play fantasy on ESPN is that the 49ers, because of those late touchdowns they led up to Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift, are the number 32 ranked rushing defense or number 32 ranked defense against fantasy running backs right now. That is bogus. Don't buy into that. The 49ers are much better than that, and they held the Lions to 17 points prior to the last 3.5 minutes of that contest. So had those things not happened, had they not had the wheels fall off the wagon within the last couple minutes, you're looking at a very different point outcome for both of those players. Miles Sanders is not getting himself into the easiest matchup for an opposing defense this week. I watched Miles play the 49ers last year. It was an ugly sight to watch. He was shut down. He did not have much room to run. But with that being said, this Eagles offensive line is a lot healthier. They're a lot better in the personnel department. I think they'll be able to have the luxury of a balanced attack because Jason Verrett, the number 1 corner, is out for the season. So now that kind of shifts the coverage up a notch. Devontae Smith is being covered by their next best corner. That might separate some other guys like a Jalen Reagor to make a deep play downfield and keep them in this game, and hopefully Jalen Hurts' own legs will draw some attention off of Miles Sanders. I think it'll be an overall good situation here. So I'm expecting borderline RB2 numbers from Miles Sanders. The ceiling is always great because he's a threat to spring one outside and score a long touchdown off an explosive play. But at the end of the day, I think that floor isn't always the safest, so that's what lands him a bit lower on the list today. Saquon Barkley, same thing as last week. The floor is incredibly low. The ceiling is high because it's Saquon Barkley, because he looks like he is a level higher than everyone else on the field around him. He's so quick twitch. He's so explosive. He's just an elite athlete. And that's going to enable him to potentially rattle off a 90-yard touchdown in this Thursday night football matchup. But when you look at the Broncos, what they did to this Giants offense last week, the Washington football team's defense might be better. It might be a harder matchup. Again, division game, it's kind of an X-factor situation here. Anything can happen in division rivalry games. But I'm not loving that floor more than I did last week for the Broncos, and we saw how that turned out. So stay aware, stay careful and cautious of Saquon this week, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's someone I'm sitting down and out of my lineups here. Potentially a big-time trade target after next week if he struggles again, because his price will just be floored out after that point. Melvin Gordon at my number 19 spot here against the Jags. This is another situation, so you're talking about Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams just above a 50-50 split. Javonte actually touched the ball one more time than Melvin Gordon did in week 1, which I think is something very significant to assess here. But Melvin still is the official starter for this team. The Jags still did allow Mark Ingram to nearly have 100 yards rushing last week. This is a situation where I think he becomes a quality RB2 start this week. If you're looking for someone to fill in for one of those other tougher lineup plays, Melvin might not be too bad of an option, and this is someone I think that you could go out and use to attack a tough matchup in your own lineup to give you some higher end upside on the back end of this week's matchup. Darrell Henderson at the 20 spot versus the Colts. We've got 4 more players to get through here. Not a matchup I'm too excited about. We saw Chris Carson do okay things versus them last week. Nothing too flashy, but also a very strong floor performance. Henderson put up nice numbers against the Bears week 1. This is a good Rams offense. We saw that on display. The passing and running game, it works very well together. I think Henderson will continue to produce as long as McVay uses him as the lead back there in Los Angeles. CEH. Seems like I hate on this guy every week, but the bottom line here is every time I watch CEH play a game, I think that dude is super talented. He has everything you could ask for in a running back besides the size factor, besides potentially being a goal line force and a player who's used in a personnel set to be a power back. He just isn't that. He's too small. If they gave him the ball more, he could absolutely be a top 12 running back, but the issue is the volume is not there. I've seen so many of you comment in the comment section and talk about Clyde Edwards having league-winning upside and having the potential to steal leagues this year because his ADP was so low. I agree. If he saw 7 to 8 more touches per game, the amount of work he's getting is just not cutting it right now. Until we see him be utilized in the red zone more and have a higher touchdown ceiling, he's just not going to be that player. The Browns in week 1 were a tough matchup, but honestly, I think that game script should have favored him. If that was Christian McCaffrey, you'd be seeing the ball flipped out in the flats to him all the time. Check it down. He's talented. He can make plays out in space. But that's not what Patrick Mahomes' thought process is. You saw that play where he spun out backwards, ran around, and literally launched the ball with everything he had to Tyreek Hill. And it was honestly a bad quarterback decision per se. Hill was covered. The ball was underthrown, which actually uncovered Hill. He catches the ball and scores a touchdown. Mahomes' thought process is not to turn around and flip the ball to Clyde Edwards-Helaire 3 yards downfield and then have him take off. He's looking for those home run plays. After the game, he said, bleep it, Tyreek's over there somewhere. And he just lets it rip. So Clyde's ceiling is capped at a point here, regardless of what the situation is. Again, I'd love to see the dude score more points. I'd love to see him more utilized in this offense. Go talk to Andy Reid about that. I can't control that for you. Kareem Hunt at the number 22 position here against the Houston Texans. This is another situation where I think that Cleveland's going to have a clear stranglehold on this football game late in the third and fourth quarter. They're going to be running things out here. Keep Nick Chubb fresh. No reason to overload the touches he gets. Sprinkle Hunt in here. Keep this a balanced attack and keep both of these guys healthy heading into week 3. I think there's a very real situation that Hunt finds great value as a receiver and a rusher this week. And Nick Chubb should, obviously, as you saw him up at the number 5 spot, he should get his numbers here this week as well. Rojo at the 23 spot against the Falcons. Breaking news, he's not in the doghouse. Bruce Arians is not going to punish him for that fumble, and I don't know how you can when Leonard Fournette literally had popcorn butterfingers the next play later, and boom, Tom Brady interception. So both of the running backs messed up. It's time to move on. Rojo's been named the starter here against the Falcons, and we saw Miles Sanders have a great game against them last week. I love Rojo's violence, his power running. This is a dude that has the potential to be a top 12 fantasy running back week in and week out, but we know that floor is not quite where we'd like it to be at. He's a boom or bust play, but this week I'm feeling boom. I think Rojo can either find himself in the end zone or have a really productive yardage total. And then lastly here, Chase Edmonds, another guy with a really nice ceiling, but the floor isn't all that excellent as well. Him and James Conner nearly evenly split the touches in that week 1 matchup against the Titans. I like Chase Edmonds because he's the pass-catching back. If you're playing in a PPR format, that obviously adds an extra avenue of point scoring for you. And I think that in such a high-powered, high-tempo, fast-paced offense, that really plays to Edmonds' benefit, and that should be something we see continue to be a strength for him throughout the season. So there are my top 24. I'll see you all in the outro. Alrighty, those are my top 24 running backs for week 2 fantasy football action. If you enjoyed today's video, if you want to support the content here on the SFS channel, drop down, give today's video a like, and click that subscribe button. Turn the bell on so you're never late for an episode and are notified whenever I upload a new piece of content. We have posted so many videos this week, and we'll continue to do that every single week for the rest of this fantasy football season. Heck, we'll keep doing it into the offseason. So if you just love football, if you love fantasy content, click that subscribe button. We want to have you join this SFS community with us. If you're looking to interact with some more members of the channel, you can drop down in the description of today's video and join the free SFS community Discord to chat with other viewers of the channel and other people playing fantasy football on NFL Sundays. Again, SFS Gold, if you're looking for the entire list of these rankings, that is also found in the description of today's video, and that'll take you on over to my website where you can take a look at that. But thank you all so much for watching today's episode. I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.